company. He is also the president of Garden America, a nationally recognized radio show and web store. Bagnasco works with breeders to promote new lines of vegetables, and he brought some seeds with him to share with us. He is responsible for bringing the new ketchup and fries and potato grafts into the North America market. He is horticulture graduate of Michigan State University. He is horticulture instructor, a book publisher, and a rose breeder. We are very lucky to have you.
Thank you. My degree is in horticultural marketing, so if you have scientific questions or practical grower issues, please talk to Carrie or Carol or Sanjun. I hope that my two talks today will help change your way of thinking, maybe inspire you in ways that you previously hadn't thought about, because there's a whole world of opportunities out there in vegetable growing. And we'll talk about some of those today. You know, 45 years ago, when I graduated, I was fortunate to get a job with Frank's Nursery in Detroit, because they were the only company in the country at the time that had a marketing department that was horticulturally related. So it was nice to have a degree and then come up with the job. And one of the first conferences I went to was a marketing conference, and I went with my boss. They hired me as assistant director of marketing, and he was the director of marketing. And I asked him a little bit about the conference we were going to, and he said, well, basically what we do is marketing people from all different parts of the industry. We get together and ask, what is your job? Because no one knows what marketers are supposed to do. So he was the keynote speaker, and he got up and he gave a talk, and at the end of the talk he said, to sum up marketing, there are 39 peaks in Colorado that are taller than Pikes Peak. And he said, can you name one of them? He said, that's marketing. And he got a big applause, and after the talk I said, wow, that was really impressive. I didn't know there were 39 peaks. And he goes, oh, I just made that up. I said, now that's marketing. But since then, 45 years later, I discovered that marketing is even more effective if it's true. And with grafted vegetables and with the new innovations in vegetables, we have a lot of true stories to talk about. So I really think that grafting is going to change the way that Americans grow vegetables. This was trials up in Oregon. On the left was a non-grafted plant, and right here, and they were pinched so that you had the two going up, and on the right was grafted, everything identical. So you have the same fertilizing, the same amount of light, and the same typical response that you get from anyone who grows grafted vegetables for the first time. Similar results with all different types of tomatoes. That one happens to be Juliet. And as Carrie mentioned, depending on the size or the vigor of the rootstock you're using, you can get, and depending on the variety of scion that you're using, you can get different growth characteristics. So why do we graft? As Carrie mentioned, you can achieve soil-borne disease and pest resistance and tolerances. You can get acquired tolerance to abiotic stresses such as chilling or salt stresses. There's a lot of work being done with rootstocks today to compensate for some of these abiotic stresses. On watermelon rootstocks, there's work being done with resistance to cold temperatures so that you can plant watermelon crops earlier in the season than you normally would to increase production. And of course to increase vigor and yields. For grafting tomato, the rootstocks are already resistant to a lot of the things that Carrie's discussed. There's some really good rootstocks resistant to southern wilt, but as Carrie said, they don't really increase yield that much. But if you're in Florida and you can't grow tomatoes otherwise, any yield is better than nothing. I'm not really sure about rootstocks affecting the quality of the fruit. I've heard that that's occurred with watermelons, and I know with tomatoes there's no genetic transfer between the scion and the rootstock. love to graft one, at least that's what I've been told. However, I have been told that it is important with watermelons, so it's important, I guess, to do research to figure out what rootstocks are going to affect the quality of the tree. Carrie was talking about the production, and part of the reason that it's so effective is this is a Brandywine tomato, and here's the rootstock. That's about almost 6 feet long. And here's the rootstock of a non-grafted Brandywine. So you can see that the vigor of the plant is going to be increased to the point where if it does get the proper fertilization, it's going to produce much larger crops. As a matter of fact, on Brandywine, here's another picture of it. On Brandywine in California, if we get 4 or 5 tomatoes, that's a good crop on Brandywine. But grafted, we were able to get 40 to 50. So there you're looking at a 10 times increase. That's not true for most varieties, but in that particular one, it happens to work out. So a little bit about the history of grafting. Luther Burbank conducted the first experiments that I'm aware of in the U.S. At the beginning of the 20th century. It's been practiced for years in Asia, as Carrie mentioned. And over 500 million, a billion grafted seedlings are produced annually by propagators in Japan. And in Japan, when they don't rotate their crops because they're limited to space, a lot of the Japanese rootstocks are bred only for disease resistance. Some of the most resistant that I'm aware of are one like Survivor. Carrie, I don't know if you've worked with Survivor or not.
I've heard of it, read about it, but we
yeah, it's probably the most disease-resistant rootstock that I'm aware of, but doesn't increase production at all. So again, as Carrie said, it's really important to figure out if you're going to use grafted plants, why do you want to use them? What's the ultimate goal that you're trying to achieve? Some of the work that Sherry Kubota at the University of Arizona was doing showed that about 10 years ago there were 30 to 40 million seedlings grafted in the U.S., but that was out of 1 billion worldwide. So you can see that the U.S. is using very little grafted compared to the rest of the world. But as methyl bromide is being phased out, grafting, I think, has much larger potential to advance. So, a quote from Scriptures, Ecclesiastes says, "What has been will be again, what has been done will be done again, there's nothing new under the sun." So we'll go back to Luther Burbank in his first soft tissue grafts. He took a tomato root and grafted a potato top onto it to see if he could accomplish a soft tissue graft, and he did. He was happy because the graft was successful, but he was also a little disappointed because he produced a plant that was totally worthless. Then he said, I should just reverse the graft, put the potato on the bottom and the tomato on top. And he did that, and that worked. Of course, Burbank did a lot of strange things, and at the time, everybody thought this was one of his strangest, and there was no commercial application to this. But just recently, Burbank stream has been realized commercially. 2 years ago, they came out with what they called in Europe tom potato, grafting cherry tomato onto a potato rootstock. And last year in the U.S., we released it as ketchup and fries. We've been working on this project for a little over 5 years, and our problem was the rootstock for the potato. If you've ever germinated potato seedlings, they're much thinner stems than a tomato. So to be able to get the calipers to match up was really a problem. So we finally found out the secret because we licensed the technology from Beacon Camp in Holland. And last year we did, we had 70,000 that we were able to produce. It was on, I don't know if any of you saw it, but it was on Good Morning America. And we sold out with all 70,000 plants within 1 week. So this year we're doing a little over 100,000. And next year we have unlimited potential. In 2011, we attended the first International Symposium on Vegetable Grafting in Italy. There's a picture of the group that was there. This is my partner, my business partner, Alice Doyle from Loghouse Plants. And we were the only commercial enterprise from the U.S. that attended the conference. So we figured we were going to come up with some information that would put us ahead of the curve in learning the potentials of the grafting market. These are just pictures right now, just to get you excited and thinking about the crops that can be grafted. We do a lot of grafted peppers. The first pepper rootstocks that came out, we found did not increase yield very much, but were mainly for disease resistance. But the new rootstocks we're using are giving us anywhere from a 30 to a 50% increase in yield. We originally thought we would graft squash, and we quickly found out that why in the world would you graft squash, because it's so vigorous to begin with, but it makes an excellent rootstock. So we do use squash rootstocks and hybrid squash rootstocks for some of our melons. I put this picture in here because the #1 crop grafted in the world is watermelons, and most of those being done in Asia. Probably over 700 million grafts being done in watermelons worldwide. But what really impressed me was the ingenuity of the Japanese people in growing those square watermelons. They didn't just grow square watermelons, but they measured the shelf space in a typical Japanese refrigerator to make sure that their melon would just slide right into it.
Can I ask you a question?
Sure.
You know what that means in there?
What's that?
There's 4 letters, 4 characters in there.
What's it mean?
I want to tell you.
Okay, what's it mean?
Can you go back?
Go back.
Yeah. I'm not sure whether this is from Japan or from China because the words look like Chinese. But also the way the writing looks like Japanese. So let's see, it's Japanese. It's basically telling you that the green Olympic games, something like that. You were doing Olympics, and this is the green Olympics.
Green Olympics. I never would have known that.
Yeah, I think that's why I'm saying that in China, because China hosted the Olympic Games 2008.
Yeah. Olympic Games, got it. We never use Maxi-Fort as a rootstock unless it's for a commercial grower. Most of our grafting is done for farmers outdoors or for homeowners, and Maxi-Fort is way too vigorous. You know, those are, and it's also long lasting, so if you are using it in a high tunnel, you can get longer production out of Maxi-Fort. We started grafting cucumbers 3 years ago. One of the things that we found with grafting cucumbers, because one of the things that a lot of people were concerned with was resistance to mildew. And since grafting doesn't normally change the results of the disease resistance in the scion, it's only the rootstock, we found out that we didn't get resistance to mildew, but if we had an attack of mildew, in our grafting trials next to the non-grafting trials, the plants that got the mildew that were not grafted would die. The ones with mildew would lose all their leaves, and then when the mildew pressure was relieved, they came back for another crop, which surprised us.
Which mildew? Powdery or downy?
What's that?
Powdery or downy?
Powdery.
Okay.
Powdery mildew. So basically the way that we do our grafting is we start by sowing the rootstock seed. It germinates, and then when it gets to this point, we begin to graft. Our first attempts at grafting, the first year, you could see we're a little metaphysical. There was some chanting that went on to make sure that the graft would take. In this particular picture, this girl up at Loghouse Plants in Cottage Grove, Oregon, was the only person that had the patience to do double grafting, which we will talk about in a little while. But again, there's a there's a commercial potential at a retail level, not necessarily at a grower's level. We originally tried the double graft by pinching out the growing point of the tomato after it had been grafted and allowing it to branch and then grafting those two. It's a lot of work to do that. It costs us 5 times as much in production to produce a double graft as a single graft. And then we tried the inverted V, which tomorrow, if we have a chance, we'll show you how that does. But you basically make your slices this way so you have an inverted V so you can graft on both sides. And if you do it right and that takes, you would think that there would be a chance for that to split, but it's almost like breaking a bone in your arm. Once it heals, it's stronger in that spot than anywhere else. So the graft itself is very strong if you can do it. That only costs 3 times as much as a normal graft. But you can see once it's done, the plants grow just fine. If you get crazy, you can do, we've done as many as 7 grafts. We thought we marketed as Frankenmato and decided the whole thing was just silly, so we're not going to do it, period. But that plant actually did produce all those tomatoes. So we originally started at a bench and a table. The environment wasn't especially sterile. We tried to control the humidity as much as possible. Tube grafting was the way we started. It's still the easiest method of grafting tomatoes, I believe. And we would stand there, and we originally had trouble getting the angles because we weren't experts at grafting yet to match up. So we would just put a strip of rootstock down, and then on the other side put a strip of scion, and then we would slice through them both so we had identical angles, and they would slip in real easy. Problem with that is it's really time consuming, and even though it works well, you don't have the efficiencies to scale to produce at a profitable level in order to keep the costs down. There are grafting machines out there, but from all our research, we find out that we are able to graft with humans much faster and more reliably than with grafting machines. That may change in the future. I know the really good ones that are laser controlled now are really expensive, over $100,000, maybe several $100,000. When we were researching this, we happened to, at the grafting conference, we met a person in charge of our grafting now, Hande, who's from Turkey. And we interviewed her by Skype after we got back, and we had grafted 30,000 the first year, and we figured, we want to do, our goal for the next year is going to be to do 10 times as many, because we were only doing a West Coast test. We want to do 300,000. So we were interviewing by Skype, and we just said, are you used to doing working with large operations in grafting? And she said, oh yes. And we said, well, how many are you used to doing? And she said, she goes, 150 to 200,000. And the first thought that came into my mind, well, that's not too far from our goal. She might work for us. And then she said, a day. So it's exactly the person we need. So we made our operation more efficient. We have an assembly line that has about 30 people grafting at one time during the peak of our grafting season. And the plants essentially get fed on a conveyor belt, and there's different stages that are done. I was telling Carol yesterday that some of our people become very good at a particular phase of grafting, but not at the whole process. And so we're able to take those people, like if you can make the cuts exactly the way they're supposed to be, maybe you just make the cuts and then you pass on the assembly line, pass those plants down the road to somebody who's just putting on the tubes. And then the next person sticks the sign variety in there. The new greenhouse that we graft in now is humidity controlled. So there's little misters that come on occasionally. It's a pleasant environment for the people to work in because it's nice and warm. And we have sterile procedures now. Going into the greenhouse, you have to clean your hands, you've got to walk through the footbath. The whole greenhouse is surrounded by thrips cloth, so thrips won't get in to spread diseases. And when we originally started, this was our recovery method, which worked real well, but again, not conducive to volume. So now we have recovery tunnels. We never use black cloth at all. We have virtually 100% take on our grafts. And Hyundai has found out, or her belief is, that she gets much quicker recovery by not using the black cloth. But if you're not using the black cloth, or black plastic, what that does do is help control the humidity. And we have 100% humidity control under there. If you do have trouble keeping up the humidity, then the plastic is necessary. And see how happy those plants are in there. Some people don't use the stakes, but because our plugs are shipped all over the country, it really helps protect the plants during shipping. Those are melons. When we first started grafting eggplant, we didn't know of any eggplant rootstocks that were available, so we grafted onto tomato rootstocks. We were grafting onto, I believe this is on Imperador. And you could see that as the plant grew, there was a difference. It didn't hurt the plant, but it just didn't look the way that it should. Now there's new eggplant rootstocks out there that we're using that are just as effective. That's our rootstock of a grafted cucumber. Those are the plants as we get them ready for retail up in Oregon. This is one of the opportunities out there. There's so many crops that, and so many ideas for grafting that people haven't used. I don't know of anyone who has done a lot of experimenting with grafted basil. This is grafted basil, but in tropical climates, basil's a perennial. So if you could graft onto a rootstock that was resistant to colder temperatures to prevent the downy mildew that basil gets, you could get, stronger plants, faster regrowth after harvest, and even for home gardeners, just to be able to put basil out and get good production of the large leaf Italian types, I think it's a tremendous opportunity. I did hear there was a company in France that was doing some work with it, but so far we haven't had any experience with their products.
Would you like to ask a question?
Sure.
Basil downy mildew has been pretty good. I think the whole nation trying to figure out how to deal with it. So do you know, or are you aware of any rootstock products that is resistant to downy mildew?
I don't know about rootstocks because that's where the experiments need to be done, but there are some varieties of basil out there, some commercial varieties now, especially the ones coming out of Germany, that are resistant to downy. So maybe grafting onto those would work. But again, we haven't done that, so I don't know. The one thing that you have to remember with grafting, when you're, and Carrie touched on this, is that grafting doesn't usually change the susceptibility of the cyan to diseases, to airborne diseases. It's only the soil that you're working with. So more work needs to be done. That was one of our grafted peppers, just showing the production that we got. In Southern California, in San Diego, where I am, we usually have 2 to 3 days of frost, sometimes a little more, sometimes we go frost-free. But in our area, the peppers were always more tender to cold than tomatoes. But now with the rootstocks we're using, the the last 3 years, my peppers have lived over the winter, and my tomatoes have frozen. So it's just kind of, and I'm sure it's because of the grafts, because I tried using some seed peppers and they died at the first cold weather. The eggplant, grafting eggplant, this again is in Oregon where because of the short seasons they have trouble growing eggplant. This is non-grafted dusky next to grafted dusky. The plant goes up here. Those plants ended up being about this tall. Unfortunately, not a lot of people eat eggplant compared to tomatoes, so I don't know how much eggplant you want to produce. But if you're in an area where you want fresh eggplant and you can't get it otherwise, grafting is definitely the way to go. Grafting heirlooms, I think there's a great potential for, especially for farmers. People today want not only production on tomatoes, I'm talking about consumers now. They don't only want to see nice looking round tomatoes, they want tomatoes that taste good. And of course the best flavors come out of the heirlooms, but the heirlooms have no disease resistance. So if you can increase the production on an heirloom and offer to the general public, maybe it's best for roadside stands right now, but I see a lot of supermarkets offering heirloom selections when you go into them. And you can produce those. I think that's a great idea. I call this Back to the Future because Brad Gates at Wild Boar Farms is one of the breeders that works with us. And he's worked with crossing heirloom lines in order to produce new tomatoes. And this is just a selection of his newer varieties. None of those are actually heirlooms, even though they all have heirloom flavor and heirloom appearance. Back to the eggplant for a second. Rosa Bianca is an heirloom variety that is reputed to be one, it's an Italian heirloom, reputed to be one of the best tasting eggplants, but extremely stingy when it comes to production. But grafting it does allow it to produce. So again, you can offer something to the market that otherwise you might not be able to get. When you're competing in the marketplace with products that are identical to a competitor, usually the only way you can compete with it is price. So it's important to get your product produced as quickly, maybe to beat the season, or get more out of your space in order to match their price or beat their price. But if you have a product that your competitor doesn't have, you're offering something where price isn't really a factor. This was a harvest of our brandy wine. Again, much better than the 4 to 5 that we used to get. Indigo Rose was from the first tomato in the Indigo series released by Jim Myers at Oregon State University. One of the tomatoes in the species from the Galapagos Islands was found to have high anthocyanins in it, which were not in, for the most part, in regular or normal tomato varieties. So they bred with that species to bring the antioxidants into modern species. And when we talked to Jim about this variety, he said that he didn't want to release it because he wasn't sure about disease resistance. And we had just started grafting the year prior, and we said, we don't care if it's disease resistant or not, because we'll just graft it and offer it that way while you're trying to figure out if it is disease resistant. So we were able to do that. Being the first of the Indigo series, there were some problems with this tomato. One is it's late ripening. It takes about 80 days before it's totally ripe. And because it's that dark purple, people think that it's ripe when they see it. But if you look at it's only purple where the sun activates the anthocyanins. So if you flip it over to the side that's hidden from the sun, you can see whether it's green or red. And if it's green, of course, you don't want to eat it. But we did find out you can cook with it at that point, and it's just fine. But otherwise, it tastes terrible. But once it does ripen, it really does have a good flavor. And Jim says that the best way to make sure that it's ripe is to go out and press it a little, and if it gives way, then wait 4 or 5 days and pick it. And then once it's picked, set it on the shelf in your kitchen, window shelf in your kitchen, and you can wait anywhere from 1 to 2 weeks, and the flavor just continues to improve. So the moral of Indigo Rose is don't pick it too early. But it's really impressive when you look at it. You know, it's got that dark purple outside and then the tomato red on the inside. That was the way we first offered it as a grafted plant. I put this big zacket here because everybody likes the world's something or other, the world's sweetest tomato, the world's largest tomato. This can reach 5 to 7 pounds. The world record tomato, I think, is 7 pounds something, and it was a variety of, it was actually a delicious tomato. Big Zac is a selection of delicious. Some people I say, well, if the tomatoes are that good, do they taste good? Well, if it was called delicious, it probably was good. But anyway, again, to get large tomatoes on a non-grafted plant, you can get 2 or 3 tomatoes that are around 4 or 5 pounds. You have to keep the others pinched off. But grafted, we were able to get 15 3 to 4 pound tomatoes off one plant, plus a number of others. There's an avocado next to a sliced Big Zac tomato, so you can see the difference in size. Some of the tomato breeders today are breeding for the restaurant industry. And chefs want tomatoes now that not only have great flavor, but they want them to be visually appealing. So Fred Hempel has developed the artisan line of tiger tomatoes and bumblebee tomatoes, which are basically elongated or round striped cherries in fantastic flavors, but again, really visually appealing. If you see those in a salad, they look fantastic. Been to some farmers markets in Wisconsin where they were putting them out in little mixed baskets for people to buy. Tori mentioned that we grafted for Johnny's. We also graft for Burpee's bumper crop. And at the retail level, there's a lot of opportunities, I think, to go direct to the homeowner with grafted varieties that right now aren't available. A little bit about the evolution of our marketing. Because of all the rootstocks that are available in tomatoes, we quickly thought that it was going to be confusing for people to know what they were buying if they were buying a grafted tomato, because you don't know, again, what that rootstock's going to do or why it should be planted. So we decided, why don't we develop a brand for consumers, and we will always use the best rootstock for home gardening, and just let the consumer know that. If you buy the Mighty Tomato brand of tomatoes, you can have the best tomato for your garden. So we started out with this guy the first year, and when it first came out, we did a focus group, and 60% of the people, we asked them to comment on it, and they said, why doesn't the tomato have any tangs? So the next evolution was to try to change it into some type of figure, which we used for about 3 months until the focus group said that they were scared by it. So then we finally went to an illustrator for DC and Marvel Comics and paid him several $1,000s, and he said, here's your Mighty Tomato Man. And my comment, I thought it was good, but I said, so we paid you $3,000 to give us Superman. But apparently we can use him, so. And the nice thing about this at the consumer level is that they could easily see the difference. It's hard to explain grafting to people as they're walking down the aisle in Home Depot, or even a local garden center where they do have time to wait in people. But visually you can easily see the difference. You know, here's the tomato you would normally buy, but look at this one. And there's no words there. We do have captions for the pictures now, but even without the words, you can get the point across. You can also get specific messages. If you're in a part of the country where lake blight is a problem, you have Mighty Tomato Man saying, lake blight, no problem. Lake blight resistant grafted tomatoes. Now, of course, you can't do that through rootstock. You have to have scion varieties that are resistant to lake blight. And a lot of work, I think, is being done at North Carolina State on lake blight resistant tomatoes. There's one that Tom Wagner's come up with called Sky Comish, which I believe is like 95% lake blight resistant, and actually has pretty good flavor. North Carolina, I think, came out with one called Defiant, which is lake blight resistant, but doesn't taste very good as far as I'm concerned. Those are just cultural informations we give up to growers.
And Jim Myers is legend.
What's that?
Jim Myers, legend.
Oh, yeah. Was that Jim's or was that his predecessor?
Well, Baggett,
Right, Baggett.
Jim to Jim.
Oh,
Jim Baggett to Jim
Right.
Myers released it.
right. So we realized quickly that a problem at retail level is going to be the difference between 1 gallon tomato plant selling for $2.99 and a 1 gallon tomato plant selling for $12.99. And so we developed a branded container so people could easily see the difference and not confuse the two. I also had the bright idea, as we were talking about the double grafts, if we were going to do them, to call them Mighty Tomatoes. And we did this for QVC, and my partner Tim Watt at Blood Connection said that I will never do this again because it took up so much of their time, and that was the only thing we were having crop failures on, and to produce that just throughout their schedule. So right now, Mighty Tomatoes is not being marketed. But we thought the idea was good because you could put combinations together that made sense. The world's two sweetest tomatoes could go together. We licensed our branded program to Australia, which kind of surprised me because I thought Australia was ahead of us in grafting. That after Asia, that the Australians were the ones who first picked up on grafting, but we found out that there was very little grafting being done in Australia. So we licensed the program to them, and they put it in a chain they were called Masters, which I believe is owned by Lowe's, I'm not sure. And they had really good results this year, and they're going to continue with the program next year. That's an Australian heirloom, Grossa Lisa. Is that German? Sounds like it, right? I don't know. I think it means big something.
Yeah.
I don't know what Lisa is. Maybe it's Big Lisa. I don't know. This was the ad they ran in Australia. They were at $8.99 each for a grafted tomato, and non-grafted was, and those aren't gallons, those were quarts, I believe. And then for the same price, non-grafted was $4.99, so a little over double. But I think if you explain to people, well, it has to cost twice as much to begin with because you're using two plants. You've got to use a rootstock and a scion. This was a picture of one of the master stores in Australia.
Big Smooth.
Big Smooth? Grossa Lisa?
It's a smartphone.
The,
No, I'm not smart, but my phone is.
that's my partner Tim at Blood Connection at one of our California plant trials showing container grown tomatoes. And one of the things that's happening that is interesting to me is the largest growing segment of the gardening market in the United States is male millennials. And for years we'd always been taught that females were the biggest part of buyers of gardening products, though males were a little bit larger in the tool area and about 50-50 in the vegetable area. But now male millennials are becoming increasingly interested in gardening, mainly because of the food shows that are on TV. They want to grow fresh foods. They want to taste things that they produce themselves. There's a sense of accomplishment if you actually grow it. You know, if you live in a city, if you live in an apartment, and you're pulled away from rural areas, I think you lose some of the identity with the earth that gives value to our lives. And people deprived of that are looking for any way to get back to it. And even if they have small homes and they can just grow something on the patio, say, you know, hey, you know the tomato in that salad today came off a plant that I grew. So I had this quote to end with from Mario Batali, and it kind of goes along with that feeling. And he said, when you cut that eggplant up and you roast it in the oven and you make the tomato sauce and you put it on top, your soul is in that food. And there's something about it that can never be made by a company that has 3 million employees. So hopefully that'll give you some ideas in where grafting can go. And then in my talk this afternoon, we'll talk about ideas with other vegetables and see how that pertains to working and grafting. So thanks for your time. Yes?
We talked a lot about vigorous, so most of the grafted tomatoes are indeterminate or didn't?
You can do both, and there are rootstocks that are not as vigorous that you would use grafted tomatoes, determinate tomatoes on. Some of our studies showed that maxifort on a determinate tomato is not the best because we were getting, I don't know if Carrie or Carol has found this out, but we would get a cherry tomato that would come out to be this big, which is not what you want if you're trying to grow cherry tomatoes. But there are some rootstocks that are less vigorous that could be used. And then others don't seem to matter. We use Imperador for both determinate and indeterminate, and it seems to work just fine. I'm trying to think of what's the rootstock for the short. One that's not very vigorous, we don't use anymore because it doesn't germinate uniformly.
Estimino,
What's that?
is it Estimino?
Yes, we
No, not Estimino.
Yeah, we've got germination problems.
Yeah, we do have problems with that. Johnny's sells Estimino, so we have to throw that for them. That's the only one we have germination problems with. All right, thank you.
Well, we have